So now let's start with the poster. And meanwhile, you guys can monitor the traffic. So now we're outside of the Kgb Lab, the tracking Lagrange buoyancy lab that we're working with. And this is the poster we made specifically for this Explore Universe event. Our booth is called Why Hawaii is a Volcano. As you know, in the Pacific Ocean, we have a very prominent feature that's a seamount chain. This this end to the east is Hawaii, and it has been interpreted that this seamount chain you see in the seafloor, that's away from this plate boundary. This plate boundary where you have lots of deep earthquakes and volcanoes. Instead of that, you have this intraplate volcanism, and this is also called the hotspot. And it has been interpreted as the plate, the Pacific plate is moving with respect to the plume underneath the plate that's relatively fixed. And because the plate is moving and the plume is relatively fixed, and also the plume is keeping producing heat, and that's why you have volcanisms and a seamount chain. And the reason you see that these seamounts are getting higher and higher altitude towards nowadays, like the Hawaii Island, is because you have the erosion thing. The old volcanoes, they have been undergone more erosion. That's why they're smaller. Hawaii is created kind of recently compared to other volcanoes, and that's why it's still the tallest. So this stuff is actually can be simulated using either numerical simulation or lab experiments. And the way we are doing in this Kgb Lab involves several very fancy techniques. One of them is called particle image velocimetry, which you can add some. So we will use corn syrup to mimic the behavior of the mantle, which is this kind of deformable material, and it looks like viscous fluid over very long, like geological timescale. And as we know, syrup or corn syrup is also viscous, so that's why we can use that to simulate the mantle and also the mantle plumes. Now, if we add some shiny tweezers in the mantle, and we heat the bottom and grow some kind of plumes, because you have heat from the core of the earth, that's why you have the plume. If we heat the bottom of the tank, we will see the plume is growing. And what's even better is you can add so-called thermochromic liquid crystals, or also known as TLCs. So we have kind of added that to the lab supplies for this event of the booth. You can check it out in the booth supplies portal on the EYU website. So we see TLC, which they change color based on the temperature because they undergone some kind of phase change. And with that, you see that surrounds the plume. You see very colorful colors, and you can visualize the plume much better, and also not only get the velocity because you see the moving of the tracers, but also you get the temperature of the plume itself. So this technique is called particle image velocimetry. Another family of doing this is basically called shadowgraph. You add a light source in front of the tank, and you project the shadow to some kind of plane, and you see the very clear manifold, the morphology of the plumes. And this is because the plume, is hotter than the surrounding fluid, and it has different density. That's why it can arise. Because you have different density, you have different refractive index, and as a result, the light will kind of get refracted when it gets through the plume, and that's why you see clearly the outlines of the plume itself. So we will gonna do that in the lab in a minute. And before I show that, is there any questions from the audience? No questions? Okay, I see one question. What is that? What makes up the difference items that vary in viscosity? Okay, that's a good question. I'm not sure I can get your question entirely right, but I guess you are asking like how do you change the viscosity of the fluid that kind of matches the rheology behavior of the mantle? Is that what you're asking for? Okay, so yeah, that's an excellent question. It's actually a big topic in the earth science. So at this point, we still don't know what's the exact rheology of the mantle yet, but we can use some kind of model to kind of understand the first order behavior of the mantle. So we think to the first order, the mantle itself is kind of has a temperature dependent viscosity. So that means when you have a higher temperature, your viscosity kind of drops exponentially. And the reason we choose corn syrup, and maybe there are other candidates like silicon oil, is because this kind of material, this kind of fluid, they also undergone temperature dependent viscosity. And that's why we modulate its behavior, so make it look like and behaves like mantle. Yeah, so that's a very good question. Did I answer your question well? Okay, cool. So is there any other questions?
We had one question that was, do you run the experiment in 3D?
Oh, yeah, that's another excellent question. I'm not sure, did you see that through YouTube or not? So in numerical simulation world, we kind of do whatever we want. We can do 2D, we can do 3D, we can even do some kind of 2.5D. But in the real world, when you do this kind of experiments, you can never create a real 2D simulation. So all our analog experiments, they're all 3D. So say this example, we basically have a square tank and we'll heat the entire bottom of that tank and we kind of generate a 3D fluid. And it's just because in some kind of setup, we make this fluid and set up the boundary conditions to be symmetric, even axisymmetric. And that's why we can regard it as a kind of simple 3D experiment. And that kind of experiment can be kind of reduced to 2D when you analyze its behavior. But to answer your question, all our experiments are in 3D. That's because in the real world, you cannot do a 2D tank, right? That's a very good question. All right, so now let's go into the so-called Kgb Lab, the Kgb you heard from the Soviet Union. The reason we call our lab as Kgb Lab is because we paint our entire lab as black, because we don't want extra light source that will kind of contaminate our experiment. Let me turn on. All right, so let me quickly show you what I mean by Kgb Lab. All right, so now you're seeing the lab when it's light, when the light is on. So now if I turn off the light, do you still see anything? No. That's why we call it Kgb Lab. It's a lab for torturing. Now if we turn the light back on, now you can see the world. So now I'm gonna talk about how we do this share graph thing. So the setup is very simple. If you want to do it at home, in the kitchen, you can actually do that. So we have a tank. The tank can be made as acrylic. We recommend acrylic because it's not like glass. Some type of glass, they're kind of fragile when you heat it. So we recommend acrylic tank. You can find this kind of tank on Amazon for like, I don't know, $30. We get this on Amazon as well. So you can use kerosene as your experimental fluids. Also, this is easy to get from supermarket. We also get this from Smart and Final as well. So basically, you add the syrup to the tank. and you find a light source. Oh wait, so before light source, you need a heat source. So what we are doing is we use okay, move the camera to the bottom. We used a circular silicon heater. You can also get this type of heater that comes with a thermal controller. With this you can better constrain behavior. I don't quite recommend use your stove top because it could be too hot, like 300 degrees C, or in Fahrenheit is even larger the number. So I would recommend use a thermistor, kind of thermal control behavior. So you can also get this on Amazon for like $20, $30. So with this type of heater, you can do a plume experiment. We want focus heat. We don't want to heat the entire bottom because that makes lots of plumes. If you want to see a single plume experiment, just heat the center. And beyond that, you also need a surface that you can project your plume, your shadow graph to. And of course, you need a light source. So you can use even your phone light. And now what we're using is just a normal torchlight. So this kind of torchlight is also easy to acquire everywhere. Now we have basically preheated this tank for like, so what time is it? We have preheated the tank for, and we turn on the lights of the torchlight and turn off the photo. And tell me what you can see. Great, this is the perfect time. Tell me what you can see. So could you zoom in a little bit? Yes, so you see now that we have the bottom, a shadow of the bottom that's kind of like the thermal boundary layer, because this bottom layer kind of heated with the conductive heat. And the plume is like a more violent expression of this heat accumulation because it's not stable anymore. You have this instability developed. And the plume with a mushroom head shape, this is very classic. It is the most important feature of a plume, at least a thermal plume. And you see this plume is rising up. It's darker than the surroundings because it has a hotter temperature, and that changes its density, and therefore its refractive index. And actually, in this case, it's very interesting. I think we created two consecutive plumes. So here we have the major one, and we have a smaller one. So the two are actually growing. It's very slow because it's viscous fluid, but I think you can tell it's very slowly rising up. If I place my finger here, like in 1 minute, you will see it kind of across my finger. See that? It's rising slowly, but it's rising. So actually, it's a perfect fluid for us to analyze the behavior of this mantle convection, this mantle plume. Okay, now this top of the plume head has kind of crossed my finger already, right? And now you see this minor plumes has been generated as well, because our circular heater is still large, and you have another kind of focused heat region. That's why you created another plume. So it's a very interesting case. So instead of using this whiteboard at home, you can also just use a tracing paper. So now if I move the camera back, so now if I add this paper to the after, like basically behind the tank, you still see this very clear plume stuff. So can you move the camera to see this? I think the audience can see it very clearly. So sometimes it's even better than the whiteboard because it's kind of filtered somehow. So another way is you can directly place the paper right beneath the tank. It's hard to see for this paper, so let me get a little bit more transparent. We have a more transparent tracing paper. So I don't know if you can see that this paper is more transparent, so you can directly attach it to this tank. So you see this is kind of filtered somehow, but you see the mushroom head top of the plume very clearly. All right, so it's very cool. You see this stem of the plume. It's basically drawing materials from the bottom layer. So it's not tracking materials from the surrounding mantle. It's basically tracking everything from the bottom layer. And you have this plume had kind of established. So another stuff, this stuff is basically you have a cold bottom, a cold top layer. That's why you have lots of slab kind of goes down. Yes. So so we have multiple ways to do the stenograph. And now if we go back to the whiteboard. But as long as you have a protected surface, you have a light source, you have a tank and a heating source that like create a focus heat. You can mimic and reproduce this kind of plume experiment at home. All right, now we can take the questions about it. And, is there any question? I can hold it. Any questions about this plume experiment? About shadow graph? How does the viscosity compare to the mantle? Okay, that's another excellent question. So as you can imagine, we don't want to. Okay, let me turn the camera back so we can see the other volunteers. Mm-hmm. We have Jay, the cameraman. Yeah, I'm the cameraman. Yeah, I'm Xiwan. So basically, the viscosity of the mantle, if we use the standard units, like the international units, it's basically like 10 to the 21, 10 to the 22s Pascal per second. So Pascal is basically a unit related to pressure. So in terms of our case, the viscosity is usually around, at maximum, like around 10 to the 5th. So it's order like 10 to the 17th or at least 16th order of magnitude smaller. But that's because we don't want our experiment that lasts for hundreds of million years. We never live that long, right? We want this experiment to be done in like days or even hours or even 10 minutes. So if we want to speed up the experiment and also use the ability of that fluids, this fluid mechanics, they kind of scale with the viscosity with its properties. So we take advantage of this kind of property, and we want to speed up our experiment to use like another to simulate what's going to be happening in like 10 billion years or 100 million years in the mantle. So the viscosity is smaller, and we intended to make that happen because that with the viscosity of the mantle is basically not acting like a fluid. It's just like a rock. When at the time scale of a human being, like 100 years, it's just acting like a rock. So yeah, that's an excellent question. Do we have more questions? All right, cool. So I'm not sure the audience can unmute themselves. I think you can. So don't hesitate if you want to ask questions by just use your microphone. You don't have to type in the chat. How are the plumes studied in actual settings? No fashion. Okay, that's another excellent question. So how do we study the real mantle plumes in the real world on the Earth? You can take it. Yes, that's a very good question. So we kind of know that usually this at least this classical mantle plumes, they create the hotspots on the Earth, right? So we know roughly where they are if they are relatively fixed in the mantle. We know roughly where they are beneath those plates. They should be roughly beneath those hotspots in the mantle. But how do we actually kind of see it somehow? Use any method? So there is one branch of geophysics called seismology. So basically, people use these earthquakes to study the internal heterogeneity, the structure of the Earth. They basically collect those seismic waves recorded at numerous seismic stations all over the world, and they use kind of advanced technique to analyze the seismic wave and to see what kind of structure of the Earth creates those seismic wave we see in the seismogram. And we use kind of the inverse method to do either 1D, 2D, or even 3D structure of the Earth throughout the entire mantle. And as we know, the plumes, they originate from the probably the core mantle boundary. So that's all we need. And that's actually why you can see in this inversion results, so-called seismic tomography. It's like you do the CT scan in the hospital. You do CT scan on human beings, you see the structure of your head, your body. But for the Earth, we can also do this type of CT scan, and the result is called seismic tomography. And in that seismic tomography, those results is not perfect, but you still see those clear structures of hot anomalies arising in the mantle. They don't necessarily, look very exactly the same as we see in the laboratory experiment. However, they do match lots of these observations. We kind of predicted that the mantle plumes to be. So yes, that's how we actually analyze the plumes on the Earth. Like we use this kind of seismic observations, and we do this geodynamic kind of analysis simulation, and we also combine the consequence of the mantle plume, say the hotspots, the seamounts, and also the topography variation, either a different length scale or time scale on the Earth. So we kind of combine all the techniques and the data we have to jointly analyze the plumes all over the world. But actually, at this time point, people cannot say that we fully understand the plumes or we know the majority features of plumes. It's just we think at this moment, based on what we know, we think the mantle plume should be something like this. But there are people that have proposed alternative reasons about how to explain this seamount change. But that's a different story. All right, I hope I have explained that to you clearly. So is there any other questions? All right, cool. It's 12:58, so yeah, let me see if I can explain the last part to you, to the audience who are still here. So as I just said, there is an advanced experimental technique called particle image velocimetry. So this is you have a similar tank. As you can see here, you have a similar tank. Here we have a bowl inside because we want to study the behavior where you have an irregular bottom morphology to the mantle plumes. So it's basically one of the topics that we're studying right now. And with the particle image velocimetry, here we use so-called stereoscopic particle image velocimetry. That means we have, I'll take this. That means we have two cameras. You can see. There's the two cameras. The kind of take screenshots, not screenshots, like take photos of the tank. The flow we're studying at two different angles, and with that you can not only get the flow inside of the plane, that's illuminated by a light source. So you can not only get the flow inside, this plane, but also with the two cameras, you kind of get the out of the plane flow. So we can scan over the tank and get a 3D velocity measurement of the entire, syrup, of the entire domain. And you can see those tracers we have added to the tank. We also actually uploaded some videos to the YouTube channel. So the Matthew or Joseph, you can post a link to the YouTube channel. So some of the videos are based on this particle image velocimetry. So you can actually take lots of photos at different time and compare them, and you can get the velocity of the entire 3D field. And with that, we can further infer the temperature of the tank And finally, we get a full estimation of what's happening here in terms of the dynamics, the temperature, the plume's behavior, and all the things you want. It's not just the light line. It kind of can be moved around along this. So by using this model here, the camera, they can be moved around along these kind of trays as well. Use the models, and the step models, they will be moving the camera and the light line simultaneously, and you keep the distance between the light line, the illuminated plane to the camera to be a fixed distance, and basically with that you don't need to calibrate the focus length, things like that again. I mean focal depth. So basically we can use a program to control all the behavior and take lots of photos, and we can actually extract the velocity with very high resolution. Basically it's just based on the resolution of your camera. Say you can have millions of pixels in one of the image, and that's how many of the velocity vectors we can do in one of the image. So it's pretty cool. You can do basically with infinite resolution if you want. The real world has infinite resolution, and it's just the extracted velocity is based on the resolution of your camera. So with this kind of technique, analog experiments, we can do even better than those numerical simulation, in some of the aspects. All right, so that's the particle image velocimetry. Is there any questions? Cool. So so basically that's what we want to show to you. If you have any other questions, you're welcome to stay here. You can also check our YouTube channel. I'm not sure if it's in the chat yet. Okay, somehow it's not in the chat. So
Shiwan, I think everybody should be being direct messaged the YouTube channel as they come in, just so we don't end up spamming the chat.
Cool. All right, sure.
But we can put it in again. It's just that way, so if new people come in, they'll be able to get the link.
I think that's better. It's just I don't see it, so I was confused. That's fine. Yeah.
Thanks for
you're welcome to check our YouTube channel, and if you have further questions, feel free to send out messages. We have also a group website. So maybe if you have some time, you can also send the link to our group website, and that they can send the emails to the our group. Use those forms at the end of their website. All right, so yeah, that's the 30 minutes tool I wanted to go through, and thank you for your concentration.